Hello, my name is Haya, third year medical student. I'm making this presentation for current and future second year students on their way to taking step 1. I'd like to share my perspective with you as I feel it's different than the usual. The intention of this presentation is not to give you a detailed study plan, but instead I'd like to give you insight on the overall experience so that you can make the most of it. But I'll still add what I feel are the most important study tips. The presentation style is not your usual, but I do ask that you give it a chance. There's not much written on the slides, as I would really just like for you to hear me out, like we're having a conversation. I want this presentation to be motivating, inspiring, even empowering for you, and something to refer back to during your studying journey. There's a lot I will talk about. Feel free to write things down, feel free to just listen. I greatly appreciate your time. Let's get started. I'll start by telling you a little bit about my personal Step 1 journey. I scheduled my test date in February for end of April. Now that's pretty late to register for a date. I recommend registering earlier because the later you wait, the more the later exam dates fill up, so the earlier you'll end up taking the exam. Make sense? Anyway, I started off in October studying from first aid on the weekends. Sometimes I wasn't consistent and other times I studied even on the weekdays. Sometimes I didn't study at all. It depended on how I was doing in the curriculum since I prioritized that. My intention was to simply begin my journey. Just start, My number one goal during pre-dedicated, my main focus was to build study stamina, as I'll call it. I was already studying 5 to 7 hours for the curriculum, but I wanted to reach 10 hours comfortably. Why 10 hours? Well, that's all I would hear about. Oh, you're going to end up studying 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours. I'm like, I'm not used to that, so let me try it. And I tried daily and worked on it daily, and it took months. I don't think I reached 10 hours until December, and at that point I didn't feel so drained at the end of the day. I didn't intend to start UWorld, but I did in December because one of my good friends had warned me to once she realized that I hadn't started. So thank you to my beautiful friend. I realized UWorld takes time to adjust to. You don't just get on UWorld and start learning. You gotta learn how to learn from it. So in the beginning, I'm taking like 4 hours for 20 questions, which is not efficient. So I would sit there and kind of reflect on how I can do better, and then I try again. For example, I lessened the time I was taking to answer the question, being aware that I wouldn't get so much time on the actual test. Another thing, I realized I was writing every single word down as I reviewed the answer choices. That also isn't efficient, not only for time, but for learning. No need to write what you already know. I'll talk more about UWorld studying later, but point is this is the time, pre-dedicated, where I learned to learn from UWorld more so than learning from it. I hope that makes sense. During the last unit, MHD, since the material was lighter and as a second year I was confident in how I studied for the curriculum, I had more time to study for STEP. I've read through not all, but majority of first aid at this point. I'm studying 9 to 10 hours a day, trying to maintain a healthy diet, exercise, and sleep schedule. And this was basically me preparing my mind and body for the marathon ahead. Dedicated came along, which was end of February, and I felt no different besides now I can put all my focus on STEP rather than STEP in the curriculum. At one point, I even questioned if I was doing enough since it felt natural to study as hard as I was, but it was because I had prepared myself so well. What I talk about in the upcoming slides will tell you more about my dedicated time. But let me add this. I never intended to change my test date, but I ended up changing my date several times. Like, seriously. Because of testing centers closing and all that. But I hope that won't be an issue for anyone moving forward. And at the end of my journey, I was happy about my score. But even more important, I was very happy about my journey. I had a positive Step 1 experience because I tried my best to make it that way. I believe each one of you can achieve the same. All right, now let's talk about your upcoming journeys. Step 1 of studying for Step 1 is determining your goal. This will be individual. So let me ask you, what score makes you think, wow? What score makes you think, I wish I can get that? Or makes you think only these type of people can get that score? Or whatever your thoughts may be. That score that you admire so much, that's your goal. Don't think you can achieve it? Maybe you don't think so at the moment, but you will gain confidence in yourself if you feed yourself the right thoughts. No matter how you feel, take the time to visualize your goal. Close your eyes or don't, but imagine you going on that site, ready to reveal your Step 1 score, and wow, it's the score you admire so much. You did it. Anytime I wondered if I could get that score, the score that I admired so much, I visualized it to make it more real to me. And with time, I believed in myself more and more. You've heard this before, and I strongly agree. It doesn't matter how hard you work. If you don't believe you can achieve something, you likely will not achieve it despite having the potential. And if you ever decide to change that goal, make it because you want to achieve more. You want a higher score. But there's more than just a 3-digit number. Do you want to build resilience? Do you want to master the art of studying? Do you want to increase your knowledge? Add on to your goals throughout your journey. Because after all, you will achieve more than you intended. Now that we have our goals in mind, we need a study plan. One of the most important things about a study plan is a schedule, so let's start with that. Setting up a schedule can be broken down to 3 parts. First, what's your timeline? When are your pre-dedicated days? What's going on during that time? When are your dedicated days? And anything going on during that time related to school, family, or anything that you need to consider when setting up this timeline. Okay, and what day will you be taking step? So now we have a start with pre-dedicated and dedicated days and a finish on your step date. We also have in mind other tasks or goals to achieve during this time. One thing I'd like to point out is that your timeline shouldn't be up to your step 1 date. Instead, set it up to where your final day to complete everything is 2 or 3 weeks before your exam date. This is in case things go wrong and you need to adjust your schedule. You have those backup weeks. But, even better, this is so you give yourself time to review what you need to. Towards the end, you will know your strengths and weaknesses better than you would have known in the beginning of your journey. You'll even know how best to study better than the beginning of your journey. So trust me, you will thank yourself for giving yourself 1 to 2 weeks of unscheduled study time. It will be study time, but you'll just know best when the time comes exactly how you want to use it. I hope that makes sense. Second part of your schedule, what resources will you use? So I recommend all the books you see on the screen, especially calculus. Just kidding. I just like the picture. It's amazing because if you were to stack all the books you've learned from over the years, it would be quite a stack. Anyway, this is your second year now. You have an idea of what resources you love and what you don't love. If you're wondering about a certain resource, pre-dedicated is the perfect time to try it. I highly recommend that you have your resources down prior to dedicated. Oftentimes, in the curriculum, we start units off not knowing exactly how to study, and we learn along the way. Step 1 studying is different, should be different. I want you to walk into dedicated with confidence, because that sets the tone for your journey. Trust me, your study plan, even your resources are likely to change, but still, I want you to start off right. I'm sure many of you may feel overwhelmed because there are many choices when it comes to resources, and it's difficult to know what's best. But I'll tell you this, whatever resources you use, you really can't go wrong so long as you're consistent. Because at the end, every resource has something to teach. What you take from it is up to you. But let me tell you this. You guys remember end of first year when we had to take a big test? I don't remember what it's called, but it basically covered all the units we had learned during first year. So how did you study for that? And did you succeed? For me, I studied for that test by going through first aid, and I was pretty consistent and dedicated, but I barely passed that test. You can imagine how disappointed I felt. But now I'm very thankful that happened, because I certainly did not take any time reading through first aid during dedicated, because I knew it didn't work for me. I only used it as reference, which is different than most people. So reflect back on that test, since that's the only test so far where you needed to study multiple units, multiple organ systems, in a very, very short period of time. You've come far. You know what works and what doesn't. If you're not sure, give it a try during pre-dedicated. Lastly, the actual schedule part. Now bear with me as I have a lot to tell you on this slide. So you know your goal, you know your timeline, you know your resources and what you want to get through. Now you need to arrange it all. Start with UWorld. There's this many questions I want to get through and I have this many weeks. With some math, you'll know how many questions to do a week, then a day. You can do this with any and all resources, and there you will have set up a schedule. The schedule part can be big picture with just what you want to complete that day, or very detailed by the hour. The most important point I want to emphasize is being mindful of yourself. I share my experience not because my way is the right way for you, not at all. What I want you to pay attention to is how I got to my way rather than the way itself. So for me, I'm more spontaneous than I am structured. I genuinely don't like having an entire plan for my day, and I certainly don't like planning for any other day that's not today. So imagine how intimidating a schedule was to me. Still, I set up a schedule just how I've explained it, but it was more big picture than very detailed. I tried following it, but soon became pretty uncomfortable. If I didn't complete something that was written for that day, it felt like weight on my shoulder that carried on to the next day and the next day. After a week or two, I didn't feel like myself. So I said, okay, I accept that I like my day unattached to schedules. I accept that I like having the choice in the moment rather than following today's schedule. I love studying, but I love studying freely. So being mindful of myself, I decided to schedule tasks for the week and sure, maybe even the day, but in no way was I going to tell myself in what order to complete things or to restrict my studying to what was on that day. To make it more clear, if it's Monday and I want to study whatever I had scheduled for Friday, so be it. If I want to study even more than what the day had, so be it. If I didn't want to study at all, so be it. So do you know yourself? Don't be disappointed in yourself if you can't do something exactly like you expected from yourself or others expected from you. Instead, it's really important that you learn about yourself and work with it, not against it. A second point to bring up is some students like to have a day off during the week to either just rest or maybe do something fun or dedicate it to cleaning and groceries. Not only that, but just the anticipation of a day off can keep you motivated throughout the week. For the same reasons I've discussed, I didn't like the idea of scheduled time off, but I did at least try it. If you haven't tried it, try it and see how it works for you. Another option, which is what I did, is to have a backup day scheduled each week. Meaning if I knew I needed to get through a number of questions a week, I would get the daily number by dividing by 6 days, leaving me one day of the week if things go wrong. If I have a breakdown or if I'm not feeling well, if I ended up going on a random adventure, I count on that backup day. But if I had everything on time, my backup day became my day to get ahead, or if you want, your off day. Now, I certainly had just as much off days as someone else going through this journey, but it was based on how I felt rather than a schedule determining it. So think about what would be best for you and give it a try during pre-dedicated. Okay, I believe this is the last point. The third point, regardless of how your schedule is set up, flexibility is key. I remember my mentee asked for my step 1 schedule. I laughed at the thought because there's probably over 100 versions. Which one should I show her? A schedule only serves to guide you. That's it. Keep that in mind. As much as you may want to stick to your schedule, it will change, and that's okay. In fact, in my opinion, change is good. If done for the right reasons, change is good. You may change it monthly, weekly, daily like me. I learned that I worked best with a weekly schedule, and this I recommend. By the end of the week, I assessed what I studied well and what I didn't. I assessed how I could improve. I assessed my well-being in terms of physical and mental health, my sleep. Then I scheduled next week. Even if you prefer month-long schedules, which is completely okay, I recommend weekly reflections and being open to change. Okay, just kidding. This is the last point. In regards to the curriculum during pre-dedicated, I highly encourage you to prioritize the curriculum over Step 1 studying, especially since the last unit is mental health, which you haven't covered. You are step studying by studying the curriculum, even if you don't realize it. But if you are efficient in how you study, then you will have plenty of time to study for Step 1 concurrently during pre-dedicated. Everything depends on you. But if you find yourself needing to give more time towards the curriculum, then that's okay. Prioritize the curriculum. You need to learn it regardless. But even so, as you prioritize the curriculum, you can still achieve key things during that time. I spoke about discovering your resources during this time, but most importantly, this is the time to build your study stamina. I mentioned that my goal was 10 hours a day, and I worked daily until I achieved that. Hours may not be your goal. Maybe it's maintaining focus for an entire study session. Maybe it's getting your sleep schedule down, very important for studying. Whatever it is, this is the time to build that. If you do, it won't feel like a huge jump to dedicated. It will already be natural to you to study efficiently. Know yourself. I've already spoken about this in regards to scheduling when I was telling you about being mindful of yourself. Now I want you to think about matching yourself to your studying technique. Knowing yourself helps you determine if you want to do UWorld questions on random or by subject, if you want to study by organ system or not, if you want to study in the morning or at night, if you want to write notes, draw them, say them out loud, if you want to study alone or in a group, if you want to study at home or at a cafe or library. Do you need the same study place or do you like a different place every day, like me? Know yourself and trust yourself. This is why someone else's way of studying could never realistically work for you. Even if it did, you still could have reached a greater potential. When you're studying, notice what brings passion out of you. What makes you excited to study? What motivates you? Again, I'll use myself as an example. So knowing myself, I like change and constant surprises. I like studying one thing then completely shifting to another thing. With that said, you can imagine how that might be very chaotic to another student. I like being around people and I like different views. I spent a lot of time out in cafes, and even during times when we needed to be isolated, I made it work by playing study with me videos or cafe jazz in the background just to bring me the environment. Point being, even when things aren't ideal, you can make it work. So what's your personality like? What makes you excited to study? What environment works for you? It's okay if you feel you don't know yourself, because we're constantly learning about ourselves. Just start with paying attention to yourself and go from there. See what you'll discover about yourself. All right, this is going to be a very important slide for many of you. Here I want to give you some study tips and recommend certain study techniques. Let's start with defining learning. What is learning? Learning is being uncomfortable. Learning is being frustrated. If you ever find yourself reading first aid or going through UWorld and you're chilling, you're not learning. Your brain is fooling you. Or sometimes we focus on something we know so well or something we love to study. For me, that would be cardiology. That's also not learning. That's your brain conserving energy. What you know, you know. Please remember that. What you know, you know. 2 points to make from this statement. First, appreciate what you know. Many students walk into STEP feeling like they don't know anything and they need to learn everything again. No, half of the stuff you will go through studying for STEP, you already know prior to starting. You probably don't believe me, but it's true. You just don't recognize it. You know a lot because you worked hard to get to the knowledge you have today, so appreciate that. Second point to make from that statement, what you know, is don't spend time on things you know. It's true. To cover everything, we don't have much time. Use your time wisely. If you know something by heart, don't spend time studying and reviewing it. You may think, well, yeah, that's obvious, but no, it's not. Your brain likes to conserve energy and has no issue fooling you into studying something you know because it's much easier than studying what you don't. That's why if you catch yourself having an easy time during a study session, you're not learning. Redirect yourself. Okay, so we know what learning is now. Great. But how will you make that knowledge stick up to step one day? The number one absolutely most important thing to do will be spoken about in another slide. Here I will mention spaced learning. I'm sure you are all familiar with it, and in fact, if you know anything about anything, it's because you have used spaced learning, whether you meant to or not. It doesn't matter that you know something one day if you're not going to know it another day, right? We learn to keep that knowledge, not just to temporarily use it. Spaced learning can be applied in many ways. Be creative. So you can review today's work by the end of the day, or you can review today's work tomorrow before you start a new study session. Here's what I did, which was one of the most effective study techniques for me, despite not knowing it at the time. And I actually started this mid-dedicated. I called it the sticky note review. So you know the sticky note app on your laptop? I opened it up, I listed the letters A, B, C down on a column. So today would be A. Tomorrow is B. The day after is C. So as I study today, I'm going to pick 1 to 3 things I struggled with during my study session, and I'm going to write that down. So under A, I put CYP inhibitors/inducers, antiarrhythmics, migraine treatment. Those topics are what I struggled with. I did the same for day B and day C. Now I'm back to day A. I'm going to take 30 minutes to an hour to review what's under A. I'm also going to add topics I struggle with that day. Reviewing a particular topic became easier and faster with each review session until it was too easy that I crossed it out of the list. I used markers and a whiteboard, first because I like using a bunch of colors, second because on a whiteboard I could write quick and erase quick. It was also different from writing things down on a notebook, so anytime I didn't feel like writing things down on paper, I get excited to use the whiteboard. I rotated between these letters, and this is spaced learning. This is similar to starting a Word document, titling it Things I Don't Know, and listing things to review. I actually tried this in the beginning, but found it to be quite lengthy and a bit overwhelming. I prefer the sticky note method, as I'll call it, because it was simple keywords listed that were crossed out with time, which made it less overwhelming. Also, when it came to reviewing topics, instead of just reviewing that key detail I didn't know at the time, I reviewed the topic as a whole to consolidate all the information, what I know and what I don't, all together. So that worked better for me. But I recommend any method of spaced learning. Be creative and see what techniques you can make for yourself. So to do well, learning is key. But you know what else is just as important? Practice. Practice, practice, practice. It's important that you can pace yourself during testing. It's important that you know how to choose the most likely. This will tie back to resources you want to use. UWorld is a must and will help you build those testing skills. NBME practice tests are a must, and I recommend taking them whenever you need to assess if your study techniques are working, especially when you make a change. Remember I was telling you about those weekly reflections? When you do make a change to your study technique, take a practice test the week after to see if the different technique has helped you. There's so much more I'd like to tell you, but some things are best discovered on your own. The last thing I'll tell you, and please remember this, never tell yourself, I don't know. Never ever say, I don't know to yourself. When you're in the middle of the question and you have no idea what the diagnosis is, do not come to answer and think, I don't know. You have accepted that you don't know. Don't ever accept that. You may not know the exact diagnosis, but you still know enough to answer the question. Your mind is full of knowledge. Do not underestimate yourself and your hard work. Think. If you get it wrong, so be it. But you know you tried, and from there can learn. But point being is to give yourself that confidence that you have the knowledge to give an informed answer to any question. This took a lot of practice, but every study session, if that thought, I don't know, came to my mind, I would change it and say something like, you have the knowledge to answer this question. Believe it or not, more than half the times, that little amount of confidence would get me to remember something. Just try it, practice it. You'll be surprised. All right, so let's talk about the second most important resource, UWorld. Don't worry, I'll tell you that number one most important thing soon. What I'd like to talk about here is how to get the most from UWorld. It's funny because everyone uses UWorld for STEP, very important resource, but yet we don't discuss how to actually learn from it. I remember that was something I really struggled with during pre-dedicated. But I've learned there's two parts to learning from UWorld. The first being figuring out the best way to test on UWorld, and secondly, figuring out the best way to capture what you learn. So let's look at the first part, best way to test. UWorld is set up to where you can do up to 40 questions per block. You can randomize questions or have it specific by subject or organ system. Test mode allows you to time yourself and reveals answers only after you've completed the set of questions, versus tutor mode, which allows you to learn question by question in an untimed manner. Now let's look at the second part, which is what's the best way to capture that information, to capture what you learn. So this is the part when you're reviewing the question. Do you want to write notes? Maybe draw things out? Make concept maps, flashcards, outline, say it out loud. You have options to both parts, which is great. You need to figure out what's best for you. How do you do that? Start with knowing yourself, being mindful of yourself, learning about yourself. And then trial and error during pre-dedicated. Try out different number of questions, try out test mode versus tutor mode, try random versus not, try writing things or flashcards or teaching someone. And above all, be honest with yourself. Which one did you learn the most from? I'll use myself as an example. After multiple tries, the best way for me to use UWorld was randomized, tutor mode, in questions of 20 to 25. The best way for me to capture that information was to write down notes and use the sticky note method. I want to highlight a few things, but please remember you will know what's best for you. First, I do recommend randomized questions simply because it's the best way to create associations between organ systems and subjects. It mimics the real test and, in my opinion, is more fun than staying on the same topic. I think tutor mode and test mode are both good, but for me, tutor mode was best as I moved the quickest doing it that way. You see, on test mode, I'd get through questions, and when I came to review, I needed to read over the question again and remember why I chose what I chose, which took time. But I do recommend test mode if you find yourself taking too long to answer questions, as it will help you pace yourself. And you can always alternate between methods as well. Let's focus a bit more on the second part, capturing what you learn. Remember, never leave a question if you haven't learned something, meaning whether you got it correct or incorrect, review every single answer choice. This starts with reading and understanding, then you do something with that information. Like we said, whether it's saying it out loud, flashcards, notes. For some of you, writing is the best technique to retain information. Writing was the best technique for me. So I already know how you're feeling. It's a lot of information, so a lot of writing, which takes a lot of time. Here's the best tip I can give you if you learn with writing. I highly recommend that you never write down anything that you know well. Only write down what you don't know. And you know a lot already, so focus on what you don't. If you need to write down something that you know, let it be because you need to consolidate that information with something you don't know. You need to make associations. Otherwise, don't write it down, despite wanting to. Remember, you're always going to want to study what you know because it's easier. Don't fool yourself. We can use notes as references, but what I think is more important is the actual note-taking part. That's what allows you to individualize that information, relay that information in your own way. Much of the information on UWorld is repeated so that you see things multiple times as you learn from UWorld, which is great because this will add on to space learning. So overall, you're going to gain a lot of knowledge from UWorld, but another thing you're going to gain are skills in answering questions, test-taking skills. Despite the number of tests we've taken this far, there's still some way to improve our skills. You know how there's an icon to write notes on UWorld when you're going through the questions? Can't picture it at this moment, but I know it's up there somewhere. What I started doing towards the end of Dedicated was that for each question I answered incorrectly, I asked myself, why did I get this wrong? And then I typed it up in the notes. Sometimes my answer was, I confused myself, or I neglected a key detail, or I wasn't able to recall that information. I never actually read through those notes because the point was not so much to have those notes, but just to reflect in that moment. So this is what I learned by doing this. Many times I'm on a question, I've crossed some choices, and I'm down to 2. One answer I'm familiar with, but I know it doesn't fit the picture. The other answer I'm completely unfamiliar with, so I can't even assess if it fits the picture. Naturally, I choose the one I'm familiar with. So reflecting allowed me to realize this. I learned because I'm familiar with this answer, and I know it doesn't fit the picture, cross it out. Don't be afraid to choose what you're unfamiliar with if you know the others are wrong. So try this out and see what you can learn about the way you're testing, and from there you can improve your skills. All right, we're more than halfway through this presentation. I've spoken much about studying and given you advice and techniques for your study sessions. The rest of the presentation will focus more on your well-being, which is just as important and necessary. Here I will talk to you about study sessions, before starting, during, and before ending. There's some important things to consider before starting each study session. First, how are you feeling? Motivated or not so much? Energized or tired? Did you sleep well? Did you eat? Recognize good feelings and bad feelings. If there's something you can do to feel better, do it. But even if you can't change a feeling in this moment, just acknowledge that it's there. Same goes for good feelings. It's very important you embrace them. See yourself as you are in that moment. Never neglect yourself. Feel recognized, okay? Second, where's your mindset at this moment? How are your thoughts this morning, afternoon, or evening? Encouraging or not? Positive or negative? Hopeful or fearful? Are you dreading studying or are you excited to study? This is my favorite thing. Because although you can't change your feelings in that moment, you certainly can change your thoughts. Feelings are just a product of your thoughts. So go ahead. Change that negative thought to a positive one, even if you're not feeling it to be true. You know what's the best way to become happy, excited even, about studying? And I did this before every single study session. And if you remember anything from this slide, here it is. Express gratitude. How amazing is it that you get the opportunity not only to learn about medicine, about human physiology and anatomy, but to actually show that knowledge and use that knowledge in the upcoming test? How amazing is it that you have a purpose, that you have something to do today, that what you do today and during these study sessions will have a positive impact in the near and far future? What a blessing it is to be where you are today. It's a challenge when you're faced with negative thoughts, but your mind is adaptable. It will adapt to what you tell it. It adapts to the thoughts you practice daily. Point being, your mindset is very important prior to any study session. Last thing is to have some kind of routine or habit before study sessions. This starts putting your body and mind in study mode instead of doing one thing and then jumping to studying. For me, that was making a cup of coffee, filling up a glass of water with ice, lighting up a candle, playing fireplace sounds or piano music or cafe jazz, adding, removing small decorations to change it up. All these things I've mentioned are all things that I love. This makes the study session inviting to me. So what will invite you? Also, if you don't already do this, I highly recommend that you always put your phone away, in a completely different room if you can, making sure it's out of sight. And do the same for other things that you realize distract you as you study. So now you appreciate yourself, have the right mindset and the right environment. Get started. So you've started. So far, so great. But of course, sometimes you'll stumble and you may get tired physically, mentally. I mean, you just got 10 questions in a row incorrect and you're feeling discouraged. You start telling yourself you're hungry or you need to pee, anything to get out of this. Sometimes we just ignore how we feel and just force ourselves to study. But of course, if you're not in the right mindset, how much are you actually going to learn? And that's why I don't encourage myself or anyone to force yourself to study if you don't feel like it. Doing so will create a negative experience that you'll associate with studying. Instead, stop. Take a minute. You don't have to close your laptop or books, but just stop. Same questions. How are you feeling in this moment? What's your mindset in this moment? Oftentimes, if you change your mindset, you'll change your feelings. Yeah, you missed 10 questions in a row, so you feel pretty down. Acknowledge that. Then rethink it. Yes, I got those questions incorrect, but I'm glad I got them wrong. I've learned from it. If I see those questions, I'm much more confident that I'll get them correct the next time. Remember, it's not getting the question correct that matters, it's what you learn from it. Also remember, you have strengths and weaknesses, right? Sometimes they test your weaknesses 10 times in a row. And that's okay. Sometimes they'll test your strengths 10 times in a row, and you'll feel on top of the world. This is one example of how changing your mindset will change how you feel. You can apply this anytime to anything. Sometimes I tell myself that each question was a patient that depended on me. Thinking so made me not want to walk away from the question. Your mind is powerful. Use it. Another thing you can do is make a minor change to your environment. Refill your coffee, change your mug even, change the music you're listening to. I used to always change my location when I was studying at cafes. That's how most people got to know me because I was the weirdo constantly moving from table to table. But I just enjoyed that change in perspective. I always liked drinking tea, and throughout the day I'd switch up the kind of tea. You can also add an item to your environment that brings you comfort. When I really felt unmotivated during a study session, I'd take out my stethoscope and either wear it or place it on the table. I'd even listen to my heart sometimes, just to remember that I'm studying something real and constant, a knowledge that comes with purpose. Try it. Another thing you can do is notice your body language. Is your face tense? Relax it. Are your arms crossed? Uncross them. Are you leaning back? Sit forward. In fact, please try this. There are many times I find myself leaning back. The second I sit forward, my focus becomes heightened. Pay attention to yourself. One more thing I want to tell you, which I actually did not realize during step studying, but rather more recently during third year. I find myself doing U-World. I answer a question, then all of a sudden I want to stop. Whether to take a break, or I'm hungry, whatever excuse I come up with, I just don't feel like studying suddenly. It took me a while, but I realized this happened specifically after I answered a question, but just before I came to review it. Whether I got it correct or not didn't matter. It was the subject. It's not that I didn't want to study, I just really didn't want to review that specific question because it was either dermatology, musculoskeletal, or anatomy based. All things that I struggle with. Now I tell myself, okay, a break it is only after you review this question. I encourage myself, get through it, and suddenly I don't really want to break anymore. I want to keep studying. Point is, pay attention to how you feel. A hard question makes you want to stop studying, not because you actually don't want to study, but because this is the question you'll require the most brain energy. This ties back to your brain fooling you. Learning is hard, and that's okay. Who best to do it than you? So you're about to end a study session. Maybe you're done studying for the day, or maybe you have another study session planned later and this is your break. Just as I recommend to have a style to starting your study session right, do the same for ending it. You want to take your mind and body away from studying. So close your laptop or sign off to make it official. Close your books, blow out the candle, move your drinks or food out of the study area. Most importantly, do not take a break or hang out in the same area that you're studying. Leave that area, physically leave. This took me a while to learn, but every time I took, let's say, a 10-minute break, I would think, it's just 10 minutes, I'll stay seated here and get on my phone or just stare at the wall. But at the end of it, I never felt like I took a break. Well, I realized it's because some part of me was still in study mode. Just as mindset was important before a study session, it remains important afterwards. After your final study session, it's important to reflect briefly. What went right? What went wrong? Regardless, feel good that you tried your best. Feel happy that even if you had wanted to learn 100 things, at least you learned one thing, which makes that study session successful. I always tell myself this: as long as I learn one thing today, I can call the day successful. I'm happy. Your mindset after a study session remains just as important. And guess what? Here, I'm going to tell you the number one absolutely most important resource during your journey. Sleep. I can feel that more than half of you are like, really? But it's true. Let me put it this way. You just studied a total of 9 hours today, and you feel good because you know you've learned a lot. You were very focused and intentional. You even got through more questions than you originally planned. If you do not get a restful sleep afterwards, a portion of your hard work went to waste. It doesn't matter how much you attempt to learn something, even if you're using questions and spaced learning. It is well known that sleep is a requirement for memory consolidation. Since you can't retain all the information you need for step 1 onto short-term memory or working memory, you need to allow for long-term memory, which requires sleep. To further emphasize its importance, let's say you didn't sleep well and you lost a portion of what you studied yesterday. Well, the lack of sleep will make it more difficult today to learn and retain what you could have had you slept like you needed it. And no, unfortunately, coffee is not a replacement. Everyone's best sleep will be different. Regardless, sleep is the final and most important step in studying anything. Still not convinced? Try this. Pick a topic that you really struggle with and review it before you sleep. When you wake up the next morning, you will have a much easier time reviewing that topic. This is something I did, and afterwards I never neglected sleep. It means a lot to me that the work I put into studying will still be there the next day, and the next day. I encourage you to spend time learning about sleep hygiene and setting up a sleep schedule for yourself. Prioritize it, even if it means starting your study session a bit later than intended. Moral of the story: sleep, and sleep well. This is a slide that means a lot to me, and I'm going to mention a lot of things, so bear with me. I'm not sure if you've noticed yet, but much of this presentation is about mindfulness. Let me ask you something. What's so difficult about step 1? Why do so many people describe the experience in a negative manner? Why do people look forward to the end of the journey more than they do to the journey itself? I remember as a second-year student, there was not a single student, not a single person who spoke well about step 1. I mean that. I hope that's not the case for you. In fact, this is the reason for my presentation. I want you to hear that positive perspective. So is it really the amount of knowledge that you need to know in little time that justifies this to be a negative experience? Sure, that's hard. But that's what makes people break down? It's not the test. It's not the amount of information. It's not the timing. It's the person. It's the mind. What's difficult about step one is the mental challenge that comes with it. You need determination, consistency, discipline, confidence, perseverance, resilience, dedication, time management, capacity to learn, ability to change, and above all, patience and kindness with yourself. That's difficult. Really difficult, actually. And when you succeed, you will come out stronger. Stronger in knowledge, but stronger as a person. But if the only challenge of step one was the amount of knowledge in such time, it's really not that challenging anymore. Because you either know something or you don't. But step one will give you the opportunity to grow mentally, build or expand your skills. It will leave a positive impact on you. That is, of course, if you allow it to, if you take advantage of the opportunity to do so. If you take on step one or any journey with a positive mindset, that's how you will gain the most from it. There are students who will recognize and accept this opportunity, this challenge, and give it their all. There are students who won't and dread every day of studying. Which student do you choose to be? I'd like to offer some of the ways I've maintained my mental health during step studying and continue to do so now. Number one being reflections. Reflecting is very important because it allows you to recognize yourself, appreciate yourself, and redirect yourself as needed. Reflect at the end of the day, after study sessions, the end of the week. That might just mean thinking to yourself or talking out loud or writing it down. But I do ask that your reflections be independent. It's important to communicate yourself to others, share things, hear their perspectives, but always allow that time to be with yourself. The second thing that is very important to consider is who you choose to spend your precious time with. Think about who you spend your time with today. How do they make you feel? Do you feel empowered after talking with them, inspired, motivated? Or do you feel tired, negative, discouraged? Not only might you feel poorly after being around certain people, but if you give it enough time, you're likely to pick up characteristics of those same people as well. As you've probably noticed, there's abundant negativity around us. Choose otherwise. Choose to spread positivity. Choose to empower and be empowered. Choose to inspire and be inspired. This is very important to any journey, but very much so during your step one journey. Another thing that's quite important to mention is to not compare yourself to others. One of the most discouraging thoughts will be those that come after you've compared yourself to a classmate. You'll think, well, I didn't score as high as she did on that practice test. I didn't study as much as he did today. Why is it that they're not struggling and I am? Let me ask you, how can we compare two journeys that have completely different paths? Why should we anyway? What will you gain from knowing you've studied more than someone else or you've scored higher? Is your false sense of being better what inspires you? What will you gain from knowing you've scored much lower on a practice test than your classmate? Is that supposed to inspire you? If there's anything good that comes from comparing yourself, is that it reveals to you what it is you lack confidence in. Because even those who are scoring better, if they look for comparison to give them a sense of confidence, then they aren't really confident to begin with. Remember that. Comparing what shouldn't be compared harms you and the other person. So how do you not compare yourself? Comparing in some way is natural and will happen. Don't force yourself not to compare. Instead, just don't give yourself the opportunity to compare. I highly encourage that you never share scores with each other. Till this day, if anyone wants to share their score with me on any exam, I'll tell them no. I appreciate your openness with me, I really do, but it doesn't matter. Why put each other in that position? I mean, that's how our scores are calculated at the end, based on comparison to everyone else's score. Let them compare, not us. We're here to support each other. Comparing will make that harder. So do not hurt yourself or harm someone else by sharing achievements in a manner that would allow for comparison. For those times that it does happen, remind yourself that we have a similar destination, but our paths are clearly different. Someone's failures or achievements says nothing about your failures and achievements. Don't compare. I spent much time on mental health because it's not something people speak much about. Physical health, on the other hand, is spoken about much more. Physical and mental health are highly tied to each other. So be active and eat healthy. Don't neglect either your body or mind. Don't be afraid to try again when you stumble. It's okay to struggle, just keep trying. When it's needed, always seek out help. This may be the first thing you do when you're not feeling right. It may be the last thing you do. It doesn't matter, as long as you reach out when it's time to. I'll leave this slide with this. Be patient and kind to yourself. be patient, and kind to yourself. How you treat yourself will define everything. And practice mindfulness, as every moment is worth experiencing. This slide is purely dedicated for when you are feeling discouraged. This is so common and natural that I can even tell you when you're likely to feel discouraged, and that's after taking a practice NBME test. It's not because you did poorly, but maybe you just didn't get that exact score you wanted, or maybe ran out of time, or maybe you just didn't feel confident answering those questions. It's okay to feel discouraged. Allow yourself a moment to feel it, but then redirect yourself. I always tried to be grateful for questions I missed on practice tests or Q banks because it made it less likely that I would miss it during step 1, the actual exam. If I'm taking a practice test and you gave me all questions that I could answer correctly, there's not much practice in that. It's okay and even great to get a question wrong, even if it's 10 questions in a row. I know, been there plenty of times. It's okay to not have had the knowledge to answer the question correctly. It's okay to have had the knowledge and you're just tired. It's okay that you're frustrated. It's all okay. There may be times when you're going to break down, or times where you feel very anxious or just lost. I'd like to give you a technique to help in those tough moments. You know that your brain has a difficult time focusing attention on multiple things at the same time. With that said, engaging your senses during tough times will redirect your attention to those senses and get you out of that mental state. So ask yourself, what do you see in this moment? What do you hear? What do you taste? What do you smell? What do you physically feel? There's never been a time that this has failed for me, so try it. It will help calm you and bring you back to mindfulness. My final message to you is that I believe in you. I personally and wholeheartedly believe in each one of you. I may not know you personally, but I believe in you because I believe in myself. If I can do it, I am confident you can. I'll leave you with this slide, full of some of my favorite quotes that have helped me stay motivated throughout my Step 1 journey. My mentor sent me that quote on the left a few days before test day. It never left my mind while I was taking step throughout the very first question to the very last. I had done everything I could to prepare myself, and all that was left was to trust myself and answer those questions. I hope you found this presentation empowering. Please refer back to this presentation throughout your journey when needed, and feel free to reach out to me through email. I genuinely hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I greatly appreciate your time and attention. Thank you. And remember, you got this. Happy studying.